for every pound the government collects in taxes, it spends £1.30. And the debt element of that is going up all of the time, and you're not getting anything for that, and effectively we're in a debt spiral. The reason being is because, let me see, so the total amount of debt that we have here in the UK is about 100% of GDP. So the coupon on the debt is about, 4 going on for 5%. So
explain the coupon on the debt.
So the interest payments.
Yeah, you go.
So if you want to rectify that situation, because it's 100% of GDP versus 100% of debt, it's pretty much a one-to-one relationship. So the growth of the economy has to exceed the growth of the debt. But we're not going to get growth of greater than 4%. We're getting sort of typically in the 1.5% range. Historically, it's been about 3%.
So would you say historically, if the government was accumulating debt below the growth rate, that's okay?
Yes. So debt accumulation below the growth. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's okay, because you kind of should be living within your means, but it's manageable. But because we've got a series of bad assumptions in our economic thinking, in our societal thinking, our political thinking, we have got to the point where this has become sort of in-baked. Actually, you spoke to a US economics professor a couple of episodes after I was on, and he was able to explain the whole thing in about a sentence. I thought it was brilliant. I should have.
Josh Hendrickson, maybe?
Possibly. I forget his name.
Yes, it was Josh Hendrickson. Yeah, he is the professor.
So he explained it brilliantly, and I wish I had thought of this. And the way he summed it up was...
Was this the insurance, or was that you?
The insurance?
So he said, since World War II, governments have become insurance providers.
No, that was Dan.
That was you.
Let me sort of paraphrase the way that he did it, because I thought it was quite neat. So he said that effectively we are fighting a total war at this point in terms of our level of spending, but that total war is directed at... the thing with wars is they end, but the total we're fighting is against old age, sickness, people who don't work. So it's basically insurance schemes. So it's a war that cannot end. So this spending is going on. The growth of the spending exceeds the growth of the economy, therefore debt spiral. And what I did, the TLDR with the first episode, although it would probably help if people just went and watched that, because that would give the full explanation, but the TLDR of that is you can't get out of it. And I set out the reasons why. So growth, we can't exceed 4%. We're struggling to get 1.5 at the moment. Historically, growth rates have been about 3%, but we've got a lot of government, a lot of regulation, a lot of taxes, and that is sitting on the creative output of the economy. So growth rates are low. The second one was tax the rich, and I didn't mess around there. I said, okay, let's just take all of the wealth from the Times Rich List 250. Just take the whole lot, and it came to whatever it came to, maybe 600-something billion.
Yeah.
And that pays for 7 months of government spending.
Yeah, and also if you do that, they're all going to leave the UK.
Yeah, and you wouldn't get it in the first place because, people like Roman Abramovich, they are not keeping their money in the Lloyd's current account.
Well, I mean, all his money's in the government account right now, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he's a bad example, but okay, maybe.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
220 on the Times Rich List is Rishi Sunak. I mean, even he is probably not keeping all his money in a Lloyd's current account. That money is. That money will fly the moment there's any suggestion of sort of wealth seizures.
He's 220. Is that his money or is his wife's money?
Oh, probably the wife, I'd imagine, yeah. PM salary is good, but I don't think it's that good.
Yeah, I can't imagine him putting in place a policy whereby he would give away 100% of his money.
Yeah, well, you can't see Keir Starmer doing it either. So, I mean, nobody's going to do this. So, and it's not like you can just take the next 250 and the next 250 because, the 250 richest people in the country, the 250 under them, own a tiny fraction of what the top 250 own.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to try and address the debt problem by seizing wealth, I mean, you would be seizing wealth right down to your great auntie Edna, who's got a second cottage somewhere. I mean, it would have to go all the way down. Another one was cut spending that we talked about, and that was probably the main focus. It was helpful to have three Brits around the table when we're talking about that. Because we were talking about things like cutting the spending of the NHS in half effectively. And that's just not going to happen. The NHS is basically religion in this country. So that doesn't work. And you would have to cut the operational budget of basically everything in government by half at this point to get the spending under control.
remind me, it was the target was 250 billion, so that we could have a balanced books and then pay 120 billion off a year and therefore clear the debt in 20 years.
That sounds
was about
right.
the
Yes.
math.
Yeah.
Because we were increasing the national debt by about 120 billion a year.
Yeah, so flip that the other way. Yeah.
So if you cut by 120 billion, you tread water. And if you
Yes.
cut by 250, you can pay it off over 20 years.
Yes.
At the moment, they're doing the opposite. They're increasing it.
Yes. Yeah.
And so just remind people, why should they care about them increasing the national debt every year by 120 billion?
Well, because eventually it's going to squeeze out everything else.
Yes, exactly.
And okay, I'll tell you the last one is going to be to print. So basically, that's the error term in all of this is print the money, and then you will get a pension, but you won't be able to buy anything with it, and it will screw over everybody else as well. Everybody who's working. So financial assets will do somewhat better because they'll just be redenominated by the new larger money supply. But certainly, if you're earning, you're going to get squeezed out by that.
I thought about it a lot afterwards, and I thought, how would you save 250 billion? And my starting point was halving the budget of the NHS. And I mean, I don't know.
Try getting elected with that.
But I think it would need cross-party consensus. And I think we're at a stage whereby cross-party consensus is needed for the constituents and for the country. And that's becoming a more important point than the career goals or the power gains of politicians. And the political hot potato of the NHS should not be used as a voting tool, but it is, with people who really do not understand the situation we're in. That said, we're heading towards it with, it used to be 4 hours, used to be like the generally accepted wait time in the NHS. It's now 6, 7, 8 hours. Everyone's striking. I don't think we should be getting away from people having access to free healthcare. I think we should be getting away from everyone having access to free healthcare. I think we should be doing things like in Ireland, where my father lives, where everybody has to pay for a doctor's appointment. Lots of things like that. Interesting anecdote for you. I bumped into a ambulance worker in a local shop, and I was like, "Oh, I've got some questions for you." Anyway, we were talking about the problems. When the strikes happened, Bedford wasn't striking. They weren't part of the union that was striking.
Right.
They said the intake within their accident and emergency department fell off a cliff, and the wait time, I can't remember what she told me, the wait times were like 1-2 hours because everybody thought there was people striking, so they weren't phoning up ambulances. They weren't going into they got rid of all the people who were going with anxiety, panic attacks, and nothing issues. And so I think the thing is if you have a health service with no friction, people are going to overuse it. And so anyway, my personal point is that maybe you only support, it's kind of controversial, but you only support the people who absolutely need free healthcare, and most people should have an insurance. And then I think you go department by department, slashing and burning all this fucking wasteful shit they do. I think you can save it within government.
Possibly, but you just can't get elected.
No, of course. That's why cross-party consensus is needed.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like we're anywhere close to that because you play that game out. Let's say you go to the opposition. You say we both need to go forward, and we both need to say that we need to bring in these sort of radical cuts. The opportunity for the other team to renege on that and take the opposite view and win power, and then to say, okay, I'll just kick the can down the road 10 years, I'll have my time in office, and then it will be the problem with the next guy. And that's what they all think. They're all trying to kick the can down the road.
Of course.
Now, the only, take France at the moment. So they have kicked the can down the road on the pension thing for so long that it has now got to the point where the incumbent set of politicians are realising that this is going to break on their watch, and therefore they need to do something. And that sort of explains why Macron is pushing through something incredibly unpopular at this point, because he knows the alternative is worse. So,
but it's a strange one, really, because those pension reforms won't affect. I mean, there's such a lag for that to come into place that it really won't affect him right now.
It might affect his ability to borrow, to keep things on track right now. So that's one thing. Okay, all of that said, I have come to possibly see a growth route out of this.
Okay, you're not going to crash the economy like Liz Truss.
No, this is actually. Are you using GPT, ChatGPT?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I've got this me and Danny have tried some things, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, we could have said to ChatGPT, today I'm interviewing Dan Tubb. Here's some details on him. Give us 20 questions to ask him today.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get through it and you'd probably maybe use about half of them maybe, and the others you'd reword them. But
Probably not even half without seriously editing them.
But it gives you a starting point. Or recently, when I've been writing articles, I've got it to just build my structure.
Well, it solves the blank page problem.
That's it.
It gets you off zero.
Gets your
really
zero.
fast.
So
Yeah.
I've had 2 articles I've written recently. I've said, do this for me. I've almost written the entire thing again afterwards, but it gave me the structure, which was so useful. But what were the things that you've done where you found it useful?
It's semi-useful for like writing show descriptions. To be honest, I'm not using it that much at the moment, but I think we will try and implement it more in the workflow. But I just asked it how the UK gets rid of its debt issue.
Okay.
All right.
Fiscal discipline, economic growth, inflation, and structural reforms. There it's 4.
Give me what's it saying on structural reforms?
The UK government can implement structural reforms to reduce the long-term cost of public services such as healthcare and pensions. These reforms can include changes to the retirement age, the introduction of private sector competition in public services, and the use of technology to increase efficiency.
I mean, it's that's like what I just said, what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's impressive. I've actually been using it for a lot more frivolous stuff than that. I mean, I find it's brilliant for, what did I ask it last night? I asked it, ask me 7 questions and then recommend 7 movies. And it did that, and it does. So it's
interesting.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You want to do it, don't you?
And I know that it did well because all of the movies that it recommended I had seen and I really liked. So I said, okay, that's great, but give me more obscure ones. And I had to do that a couple of times, and I ended up watching some Spanish time traveler movie or something. But it's a really powerful tool. And then I thought, okay, I could use this now to recommend book series, or you can use it for a whole bunch of other things. But I think we're only scratching the surface for potentially what this AI technology can do. And actually, what I'm going to reference here is you've interviewed Kathy Woods, haven't you?
Yeah.
So Kathy Woods
Wood.
and her art,
Singular.
Wood, there's only one of her. That's right. Every year she puts out a big ideas report.
Yep.
And that's really interesting because what it looks at is the convergence of new technologies that are coming forward and how they can reinforce each other. Now, we have had a period like that before. So at the early part of the 1900s, we got things like electricity, steam trains, automobiles. So these technologies that could reinforce each other. And what they did was they increased the growth rate of the West. So the growth rate before that had been sort of, sub 1%. And then after that, in the 1900s, we got a growth rate of 3%. Now, you might think, okay, well, what's the significance of a growth rate of 3% as opposed to, say, 1.5%? Does it really make that much difference? It makes a huge difference. So if you were to rerun the 1900s, take the US and give it a growth rate, so it actually had, between 1900 and 2000, a growth rate of 3%. Rerun that again with a growth rate of 1.5%, and the US today would have an economy which is smaller than Brazil's.
So it's compound growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually it's worse than that because the US has a higher population than Brazil, so GDP per head would be lower than Botswana today. So a fairly small change to the growth rate can have a significant effect down the line. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Western growth rate has been 3% for a while. It starts to get more difficult to draw something meaningful from that post about 2000 because of the magic money tree effects that came along. But as I talked about in the first podcast, we're struggling around sort of 1.5% now, with the debt growing at 4 or 5%. Now, what Kathy's Big Ideas report looked at was the convergence of, this time it isn't trains and electricity and automobiles, it is 3D printing, it's AI, it's self-driving cars, it's the energy revolution stuff that's going on. There's a whole bunch of different trends which, if you combine them together, they think that you can get growth up to about 6% by 2030, and you can get growth up to I think they said 10.5% by 2040.
Okay.
Now that is absolutely huge.
And that compounded means you can start paying off the debt.
So again, let's go back to that experiment between 1900 and 2000. If you were to give the US a growth of not 3% during the 1900s, but 6%, the US would be 20 times wealthier than it currently is. You would have an economy bigger than the rest of the world put together.